Hi, my name is Ken Masterson. This is another one of my continuous um, blog posts describing some of these microbiome who have asked me to take a look at it. Quick reminder, as you can see on screen, is I'm basically a statistician, data scientist, AI person. I'm not a licensed medical professional. However, I can build pretty good models, and they seem to be pretty good at predicting things that help people. And actually, no personal opinion because it just works strictly from the microbiome data, and in general, not even from diagnosis, or at least it would do it without using a diagnosis. I do make mention to Dr. AI, Dr. Artificial Intelligence, because that's basically how the suggestions are being done. Okay, what we have here is a person who has had gastro problems for 15 years, which is major bloating, major problem, all sorts of things all over the place. Very complicated person to begin with. So it gives a good description of all the things he has done. Some people probably have a great degree of empathy for him. And then he comes on. One of the interesting aspects of it was, before I did the review, he had used the site, and as you can see, the suggestion for him using the site himself has caused significant improvement. After 15 years, he was quite happy for that. As he cites, it being decades, and those things just did not do any changes. Okay, now I went in and I did the usual way, and he happened to have three sets of samples. He had from Microbiome from a couple of years back, and I looked at it and just to see if there's a general pattern for the shifts. And what we find is that overrepresentation of the more common bacteria in the gut is what his Microbiome sample and his latest one, which he did, I believe, after he put his old samples through and worked on those suggestions, we see that things are evening out. Conceptually, what we want is we want to have all these items about the same number, or alternatively have the one which are low percentile being lower for the first couple of ones. That means the ones which are rarely seen aren't basically there. When that number gets particularly high, you have a very atypical gut bacteria, and usually that implies, oh, 1 second. Hi, my name is Ken Masterson. I wrote the microbiome description website. I already started all my recent blog posts by a declaration. Basically, what I am is somebody who knows how to write AI programs. I'm a very senior developer. I've been principal architect, software architect, or engineer many times in my career. Have taught artificial intelligence, and also able to read medical journals. And read medical journals dates back to a special STEM program when I was a teenager. So I started reading medical journals when I was about 14 years of age. So I can read them, understand them, and able to encode the data in. So I'm not a medical professional. All I can do is calculate odds using information from studies as to the best probability of helping you. Not guaranteed to help you, and the suggestions are basically machine generated, which means that there may be things which are suggested which are definitely not to do. In some cases, the suggestions actually are things which you shouldn't do, like take Roundup, but Roundup and Roundup exposure can be significant for a few people. Okay, so much for that. Often refer to my site as Dr. AI, but known as Dr. Artificial Intelligence. And what we have here is the interesting case, frustrating actually when I first started going into it. Basically has 15 years of problems, no problems. Get it? He sort of knew it, but although he did microbiome studies a couple of years back, the problem was it gave information but didn't give an action. Microbiome prescription goal is to give an action no matter who test you make use of, and we simply make use of the maximum amount of information available. Ideally, you have a rich test like Ombre or BiomeSite, where we have a lot of information which can be easily imported into the site, and we can use all that information to handcraft suggestions better. So he went through, described things, you can read that on the blog. The interesting thing was, it appears that from his earlier ones, he came to the site, uploaded his old, several years ago for sure, because these are uBiome who have been out of business for a number of years. Site got suggestions and implemented. And the result of the implementation was, first time in 10 years, things started changing for the better. So even though the information was old, probably his microbiome was very stable in a stuck dysfunctional state. So older information gave enough to make suggestions and to proceed. So it's nice to see that, hey, the artificial intelligence does make reasonably good predictions which are actually helping people. So we go through, he describes what he does, and you can go through. One of the interesting thing is NIM is something which helps. NIM, most alternative medical types don't actually mention NIM. I do because, hey, that's what the Dr. AI says is helpful for a large number of people, etc. So we went through, and let's take a quick look at analysis. One thing which I've added is the overview. Now, the overview purpose is to see at a high level where things are shifted. 0 to 9 indicates the bottom 10%. These are about 10% of the time in people. These are another 10%. So each of these is 10%. In theory, if you had a quote, totally normal, healthy gut, then what happens is all these numbers should be the same. They don't. So this is one is uBiome. You see here it's underrepresented and here it's overrepresented. So he has less of the diversity and more of the dominance of species happening. And then we go down and we take a look at his latest sample, and it is much better. Still a slight bit of shift to having less of the low ones, but things in general are there. Let's go down and went and look at Jason Harleck's suggestion, and basically, hey, he's better than 19 out of 20 people. So in one sense, there's no apparent health problem whatsoever. Although he describes a lot of health problems, Jason's criteria doesn't stick out a sore thumb that he is atypically unhealthy. And you look at the new feature, which was the over and underproduction feature, and we can see that there's overproduction of things which are usually low, and it basically over and under means that too much variety of compounds are being produced, and of some compounds, and then there's a bunch of the less dominated compounds are underproduced. In other words, too much of a good thing is not good, and not enough of another thing isn't good. So there's a shift there. So it's again a attempt to get a general feeling for what the nature of the problem is, and with the item being overproduction, that actually means that what we want to do is reduce bacteria. Taking probiotics may not necessarily be the wisest choice, because the probiotic usually is to supplement, to add in more stuff, and when you're already sky high,
doesn't really bother you much, except it makes a bad situation probably worse. Okay, so let's take a look at the road forward. There's a lot of health issues, and go there. There's an oddity in the data which I need to track down. If it was my data processing, because what happens is the numbers comes in, and if they don't have the next layer of the hierarchy, I synthetically created, and I may have a bug here, but this is just something. In this particular case, it doesn't affect it because there's only one small portion of 700 items which has this characteristic. I went and looked around and looked at a bunch of things that were odd, and ended up a very large list of things which are up at the species level. And those are the things you can see. All these are high. So what we ended up doing is walk in and, hey, when I picked things, and the interesting thing is, my usual thing is for confidence, I want to keep to the upper end, usually 0.5 and above, sometimes 0.4. And taking a look at this custom selection of just things which seems definitely problematic, we end up with just 3 things: rice bran, quercetin, and basically licorice. And then we had things to remove. Again, we have a very short list. Now, the list is determined by what we have information on. And what we have information on is not particularly great, because the information has to be information about studies about a particular substance, and the flip side, the study has to detect changes in bacteria. And often when we're dealing with rare bacteria, nobody bothers looking at them because they are too rare, so that given a small sample size, which most clinical studies have, you don't detect anything. Okay, so we have verbene as something to avoid: red wine, resistant starch, slippery elm are things to be avoided. Then went through and did the classic proforma building a consensus. The consensus model uses different ways to pick bacteria, and also use slightly different ways to weight what the differences are. So it, in some ways, it's sort of shooting a shotgun and then gathering up everything that's there. And the goal is, we don't know what the right answer is. We don't know what the right approach is. We have viable approaches, a bunch of them. So we try a bunch of them, get the results, and come back and see if we have agreement. Where we have agreement are probably the safest decisions to follow. Where we have a lot of agreement as something to avoid, those are likely to avoid. We don't know what the answer is. We don't know what the perfect method is. And all I'm doing is saying, okay, here are a bunch of viable methods. Probably each are reasonably good. By doing all of them together, we get a consensus which should have greater confidence of actually making a desirable change. Which is why nowadays I almost always do consensus, because it seems to be the results are good, and often the results, as we'll see here, from doing a hyper concentrated ones and the consensus, often the results come out very similar. So you can nitpick all you want to be as precise as fine. Always at the end, go back to consensus, and your customized results are compared to consensus. So here we have our usual video on how to do it. Nice red t-shirt I had. Okay, and once we did consensus, we sort of had a what? Excuse me. Wait a minute. We didn't just see all these things up above, almost, apart from cannabinoids suddenly popping up, and far infrared sauna, and far infrared sauna, something which I've done, and I basically do it at least once a week as a preventative thing. Cellulose as a prebiotic, and then we have a void list, which is similar as being one thing. Refined wheat breads, etc. Looking at grains, it was sort of interesting. Only one grain was on the to-do list, which was oats. Almost every other one was to avoid. In some cases, a bit fuzzy about the void. This is not predicting whether or not a person is gluten sensitive or wheat faint. That is another chunk of information that comes in from different tests and which your medical professional would be hopefully be able to consolidate. Main thing, my one usual red flag I try waving in front of people is you may feel better if you go gluten free. Often the reason you feel better is you have developed an allergy to GMO wheat, which is dominant on the market. Thereby, it has gluten, and therefore you make the assumption all gluten is a problem. It's not. You may want to go over and try, starting with small dosages, barley, rye, and oats. Each one of those has a different type of gluten to it, chemically different. You may or may not react to it, but the catch is, if you're Northern European, barley, oats, and rye is what your ancestors traditionally have ate, not wheat. Wheat is a southern grain, not a northern grain. So if you're Northern European, you may want to consider that. Probiotics went through, and basically not much. And then again, we saw up above how we have overproduction, so not having any real probiotics being shouted at you indicates, okay, no particular one. Again, not great amount. Again, we have a couple of vitamins. And then my comment that the numbers are not astoundingly high in terms of the weight or the confidence. But we see that there is a problem. It's what I call a borderline frustrating case, because things don't come out easily. So I end up describing, basically, turns out that he tried licorice with poor results, but we ended up getting into the whys, and it may have been the form of licorice, and I actually give a warning later down. So it gives the information. But basically, key thing is, remember, everything is odds. Doesn't mean you have to avoid it. No. What you should do is, if it's on the void, you should reduce it a little bit. Doesn't mean you have to go cold turkey or whatever. Stop. Just reduce it a little bit, because you're trying to shift the population. You're not trying to exterminate the population. You just shift it. So you simply encourage certain things to happen more and discourage other things from happening. That's all we're trying to do. Process will be slow. If you go more extreme, it may not cause things to happen any faster. So it's just taking suggestions. Do not take everything as gospel. You must do A, B, C. No. Doing A and E, that's nice. You are shifting your odds, and game is all odds. That's part of machine learning. That's part of artificial intelligence. One thing I will toss out, although I looked at his rates for Akkermansia, basically his rates are 50th percentile typical, and happen to be very close to what my own personal rates were before I started taking the Akkermansia probiotic, and it did cause a positive change. So there's a link there if anybody interested in trying. You get a 30% discount. Signing up for a subscription, which, remember, sign up for a subscription, the thing arrives, you go back and you turn off the suspended subscription. That's it. You get things cheaper for the first bottle. And if you decide to have it later, you can go back and turn it on and deal with it that way. Okay, so that's basically the first part for you. Now let's take a look over at the actual details. Okay, I think I'm going to concentrate on the microbiome tree here, so I just click here. And I should mention that I just recently updated the computation, the logic, etc. So if you go up here and see box whiskers and you see there, you can go over the classic lab percentiles, and it will go and do it. Things will be highlighted because each one changes the range, so you may be out of range for one and in range for the other, or you go up to cutoff mole crop, And in a few seconds, it will repaint, and there we see what the changes are. Again, we don't know how to pick the right ranges. And the ranges often are dynamic because it's actually more likely a range in combination with other things. And some recent work I did with long COVID study is that could I find an ounce of statistical significance with at the bacteria level, no particular shift. But when I looked at the enzymes that were being produced, things just went off the roof. And all these were caused by small contributions by a whole host of different bacteria. And that is one of the challenges, is that we're not talking about individuals, we're talking about groups of individuals working together, and they may not even be the same species or strain. They just talk back and forth and get things going. Okay, so this is there. Now I want to quickly hop to look at Akkermansia. You can see he's sitting here at the 51st percentile for his latest one. If we go back and take a look at the earlier one, oops, and that's fine. Oops, excuse my typing. And we actually had none showing up in his earlier sample. Let's go back to the other one. There we are. And it was also sitting about the same. Now, the numbers here are, sorry, got the wrong one. Oops, none on that one. That's 629. And let's go on 506. And none on there. So Akkermansia showed up on his latest result, which sort of suggested Akkermansia is something which has come in, returned recently because of following the earlier suggestions from his old samples, and it sort of suggested perhaps trying Akkermansia probiotics for a month may have some good positive results. It's a simple experiment, and generally myself and my wife, who has Crohn's disease, both found major improvement from taking the Akkermansia probiotic. Okay, I think I'm going to shut up because it basically covers just about everything of major concern. You can read the rest of it in the post itself. Okay,